can an LCD monitor at an insane 520 frames per second actually match an OLED at a far lower price? Well, let's find out by taking a look at the ASRock PG27FFX2A, which was sent to me for review by ASRock, thank you. However, that's not going to be coloring my review of this. No, if it deserves a beatdown, I'm going to give it to it. But in any case, this is a 27-inch 1080p IPS LCD panel. That's right, no mini LED, nothing like that. We're talking regular, degular LCD at 520 Hz. Now, it does come with two HDMI 2.1 ports and a DisplayPort 1.4, so the connectivity is pretty good. And it even comes with two 2-watt speakers if you're feeling brave enough to try out speakers on a monitor. We'll see how that holds up. But in any case, yeah, the selling point for this thing is a very high refresh rate for a very low price, as I've seen it regularly available below $300. And in fact, at least refurbished, I recently saw it for $262.99. And I'll be honest, specs like these for that low of a price, that's kind of a steal. And if you're interested, I will have affiliate links in the description below, but specs don't tell the whole story. No, testing will. So let's jump into that testing, starting off with the accuracy. Now, if you just want the TLDR, feel free to skip ahead, but for those of you who are display enthusiasts, let's jump into the portrait display Calman results. By the way, I'm a part of their reviewer program, and I'll also have a link to that below. Thank you to Calman. But starting out with the SDR performance, and this is where you would expect an LCD to do pretty good. Now, unfortunately, this monitor does have some issues. I mean, it's an LCD, it's not mini LED, it's not OLED, so the pixels can't turn off completely. This means that as you get close to 0 nits, well, unfortunately, it can't display that, and it's going to be raising that shadow detail even in SDR. Also, it does seem to be slightly stretching colors, and the white balance was a bit off as well. Even worse, the color checker analysis exposes some pretty significant color errors here. I got an average delta E of 4.3, which means there will be visible and significant errors when it comes to colors. And in HDR, because yes, even though it's a regular LCD, technically it does support HDR. While it does okay, unfortunately, there is some over tracking when it comes to shadow detail, as you'd expect, and under tracking at the higher luminance levels, not so great. Although strangely, the color checker for HDR was actually better with an average delta E of 3.92, though it did have some pretty significant errors here as well. And for the BT 2020 color gamut coverage, which you'll want to get close to 100% if you're aiming for maximum HDR performance, well, unfortunately, it gets just under 68% for UV. That's not great. In fact, that's worse than older generation WOLED panels, making this, well, not so great for color reproduction in HDR. So the TLDR, is this an accurate monitor? No, it certainly isn't. It has quite a few errors in both SDR as well as HDR that, to be honest with you, are actually worse than I was expecting, as I was hoping the SDR at least would have a little bit better results. So if you're a colorist, certainly this won't be the display for you. However, for professional gamers on a budget, that won't matter to you too much, but what will matter is the gaming. Now, normally I'd go over the brightness and HDR experience. However, this is not mini LED, it's not OLED, so there's really no point testing that. It's gonna be roughly the same brightness all the time. So let's jump straight into gaming. And here you can see that actually it does have very, very good latency at its fastest 520 Hz refresh rate, and this is what you're paying for. Again, under $300, and coming in as one of the fastest displays I have ever measured is a very, very impressive result. And if all you care about is input lag, well, honestly, this might be, for the money, one of the best monitors you can buy, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Sure, it might be fast, but what about the motion performance? And here's where, unfortunately, it disappoints. Yes, the ASRock PG27FFX2A is really, really fast, but unfortunately it does not have backlight strobing that I could find. And with that being the case, well, unfortunately that does mean that no matter what overdrive setting you use, there's gonna be some amount of trailing behind the UFO. And I want you to take a look at the other OLEDs that are on the right. I mean, 500 Hz OLED absolutely dunks on the motion performance of this 520 Hz LCD, and 240 Hz OLED, to be honest with you, I think is actually still better than the 520 Hz on this LCD. So I think it begs the question, should we be using LCDs for such high refresh rates? Now, if you do use backlight strobing, yes, you can actually match the 240 Hz or even 500 Hz of a OLED display in some aspects, although you might run into crosstalk or other issues with LCD when it comes to motion that don't make it quite as smooth of an experience, even if you can technically maybe match the clarity on the very, very, very best tuned and fastest LCD panels with that backlight strobing. So what I'm telling you is, can LCD match OLED in motion? And the answer is just flat out no. I've seen many LCDs, including ones with backlight strobing, and you just simply, at least at the same refresh rate, you cannot match the smoothness of an OLED. Now, if an OLED is at a significantly lower refresh rate, maybe you have a 520 Hz LCD versus a 360 Hz OLED, and that LCD has backlight strobing, yeah, maybe I would consider those to be somewhat evenly matched, but then you're having to pump out a lot more frames to get as smooth of a presentation than you would at OLED. So what I'm saying here is, I honestly think about beyond 240 Hz or maybe 360 Hz, we should move on from LCD and exclusively use OLED, as LCD does have to pull a lot of tricks to try and match the performance of an OLED, and in my opinion, it still can't. So I just don't think that a 520 Hz refresh rate should be even targeted by any LCDs on the market, period. So with that being said, look, that does call into question the very existence of displays like this, and it will require a very low price point to make them something that I would recommend. Now, thankfully, this ASRock does come in at a very low price today. However, it didn't start that way. It started at, I think, closer to $500, and that is an insane ask for a display like this, and nobody should be asking that much for an LCD in 2025. And look, at a 1080p resolution, you're also gonna have pretty poor text clarity, and you're also gonna have very poor viewing angles as well as contrast. The contrast on this display is absolutely abysmal. I'll show you some images here, or video of it versus an OLED display, and the difference in terms of image quality is night and day. So you're giving up a lot to use an LCD, and again, you have to be saving a lot of money for it to be worth picking up a display like this. So let's just jump straight to the conclusion, because to be honest with you, this is a pretty straightforward display. You're probably only going to be looking at SDR and gaming only on this, and that's what I focused on in this review. And do I feel like at $263.99 that this display is worth it? Well, I think that really depends. Look, if you're someone who's unable to upgrade to a faster GPU and the only thing that you want is faster input latency, well, again, I think this monitor is actually pretty much unbeatable at its current price point. That is an insanely good price point for a 520 Hz display that, again, is one of the fastest displays I've ever measured, period. And if that's all that you're looking for, again, I'll have an affiliate link to this thing in the description below. And yes, I would recommend it to you. However, for those of you out there who are looking for something that has very good image quality or very good quality in motion, this is not a good choice. It has far too many issues, all the way from contrast to resolution and clarity to viewing angles to even the motion performance is just so far behind its OLED alternatives that even at its reduced price point, I would urge most people to try and just wait, try and save up a little bit more money and pick up a more expensive OLED if you can find it on a deal. For example, at times I've seen some 240 Hz OLEDs go as low as $399. And yes, that is a significant increase over the $262.99. However, you are getting a massive improvement to overall image quality. And to be honest with you guys, look, I love a lot of ASRock products, and they are actually making some OLEDs, so I am looking forward to hopefully checking those ones out. In fact, I'll have links to their OLEDs in the description below. But overall, what would I rate this monitor? Well, look, in terms of value, it's probably like an 8 out of 10 for what you're getting. But as an overall display, well, it needs some work. And so I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 10. And in fact, I'm gonna go as far as to say, I think this is gonna be the last LCD I probably will ever review when it comes to monitors, as unfortunately mini LEDs just aren't fast enough to compete with OLED, and regular LCDs that are not mini LEDs, well, they're just falling so far behind that going forward, I'm gonna be focusing on OLED and maybe some mini LEDs if they do happen to improve the response times and local dimming on those, as well as potentially micro LED, assuming those ever become affordable. But there you have it. Yes, LCD in 2025 cannot compete with OLED, and I would highly urge anyone who's on a gaming PC to try and get any sort of OLED if you can find it on a sale. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And now Rupro is offering a new detachable and upgradable pure fiber cable that sends the same 48 gigabits per second signal through its ultra thin and flexible housing, making it easier to route through walls. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.